Hey, what's up, everybody? This is MileSplitLive. I'm Corey here with Brian Dybel and Travis Miller here. After some decent cross-country action happened over the weekend.
Yep.
Yeah. Guys ready to talk some cross-country?
Let's go.
Yeah. Alaska. Or it's Alaska, right?
Yeah, Alaska, 6 weeks away from the state meet. Getting ready, baby. Let's go. Alaska typically is last weekend in September that they have their state meet, so I think they're one of the first ones on the blocks for the state meet. Obviously, things start getting darker there a little earlier than
Getting
most
the
places,
party
so
started is
they're gonna get it started
Alaska.
early, but that's why they've run some of the top times in the country. As of last week, they were running some top times. So kind of interesting.
It looked a little weird last week seeing Alaskan runners up there near the top.
The year of Alaska, man.
The year of Alaska. Starting that out this weekend, we had some decent runs happen. Texans, for sure, definitely came out and showed what they were made of early in this season. We're going to get to a few guys. I mean, what guys to you, girls, stood out this first weekend?
Take it away, Brian.
Looking early on, a guy who did really well at the end of last season, Cruz Gomez from PSJ Memorial down in McAllen, very southernmost tip of Texas. He ran really well. I think he has the U.S. number 8 time in the country right now, 15:47.60. So Cruz Gomez, he's a guy who could and should be in the national conversation down the road. He went to NXN last year and was 66, I believe. So
talking of Texas guys that have really a national prospects in the future, he's definitely among them
in the conversation.
Carter Cheeseman, Michael Labeta, but Cruz, I mean, probably
Cruz is
doesn't
the first
get
one to race so far.
Right,
he doesn't get as much notoriety.
Exposure being down McAllen right by the border, but he's legit coming in this season.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you watching online, whether it's through Facebook or Twitter, remember you can always leave comments and we'll bring them into the show if you guys have questions or want to talk about other things that we have going on. And with Cruz, too, I think he kind of flies under the radar, or has, just because of some of the guys Texas has had over the last couple of years. But to see how he's progressing, it'll be really interesting to see if he can, after getting, for these kids, the first time you get to a meet like NXN, it's just such an overwhelming experience. Tough. So I think now to see him running so well in these opening meets is a really good sign. Now he can bring that experience back to Portland, and we see it a lot of times. Even Keller girls last year, a great example. That first time, you're just overwhelmed. You're trying to get through the meet. Then you go back that second year, and now you can have some concrete goals and really start chasing after a good time because you've been there and you feel more comfortable.
And in Texas, as we've talked with Will, their webmaster, a lot about how you see how you have success in this state, and a lot of times it's based around sort of the region you're at. Houston runners, Dallas runners, Fort Worth, they always most times get the respect out of Texas. But when you see a guy like Cruz come out of the southern border of Texas and really come out strong, it gives you an indication of this state isn't just made up of these big time cities. It's guys like that. Guys like Michael Labeta in El Paso really doing some wonderful things.
Yeah, the Rio Grande Valley has a lot of solid talent down there as well for the state of Texas. So it's good to see him coming through and showing that on a national level.
Saying that, though, Muirhead, also
number
one right
Texas
now.
Guy from Lovejoy, they always come and represent well. Class 5A. Normally they win the state title every year, so it seems like they're just continuing their reign and role of dominance. And it's very early, but I mean they have Muirhead. And they had another guy up there in the top 10,
Harper,
20.
Harper
yeah,
Moore.
Thank you. Yeah.
Harper Moore.
So, proven that they're not to be messed with. And they've always been just off of, and correct me if I'm wrong, just off of making NXN. It's always tough, from the South region. They're always in the mix though. Is that 4 or 5, maybe 6, 7 team, but a couple guys swaying up a little higher, they could be right there at nationals. And
so they're not getting wild cards out of the South.
Yeah.
Well, is this the only time you think we're going to talk about Will Muirhead, or do you think after as the weeks get rolling?
Interesting thing though, when you look at Cruz, that's a meet looking at his athlete profile model, but he hasn't run before, so you can't really gauge that time to anything. But Muirhead has run Plano ISD for the 3rd year in a row. This is the 3rd year in a row he's dropped over a minute. So from 2015, he went from 18 minutes then down to 16:30, and now he's running 15:20 some or whatever it was. So that, to me, shows he's moving in the right direction. This isn't necessarily a fluke or this not just fast course. Hey, he dropped a minute from where he was last year. So who knows, from where he's going now, he's definitely on the right trajectory.
Yeah. Coach Christensen, man, they always have a great group of guys and great coach, obviously, to get them to where they need to be at the end of the season.
If you go check it out on MileSplit as well, just search for Lovejoy workout. Brian's been out there, done some workouts with him. You can watch that too.
Yeah. Well, Texas is obviously one of those states that gets an early run at courses, but in Ohio, we also had an early invitational out at the state course at the Raceway, and
Team Horder.
Team Horder,
no,
not there.
Is that over now?
He's out. He's out. He's
Are we done with that now?
He's gone. He's in Indiana right now.
All
but
right.
we got a new crop of athletes that are really coming up, and we have to figure out who's Ohio's big dog this year. Do we have any thoughts on who it could be? I mean, Matt Duvall, Pickerington North, ran very well, won Division I there. Do we think he could be a guy?
It's wide open.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Other than Conrad Smith, I think, it's wide open. It's going to be interesting to see who steps up and fills those shoes. I think we talked about it last week a lot. I think Matt Duvall is on the right track. He finished 76 last year at the Midwest Regional, so I think even that meet alone in of itself, like getting into one of those regional meets is a different experience than a state meet because you have top guys from all over that area. So for him, getting in that meet and maybe not doing as great as he wanted will be something big for this year. As he's only going to be, looks like a junior. So that's pretty impressive. So we'll see. He could be a definite guy.
Going from 23rd, I believe, at states to maybe a favorite. Is there some challenges to that? Obviously with the guy like Conant, who was the runner-up to Horder last year. Does he kind of just slot in because he's experienced, or does Matt not even worry about the fact that he wasn't really in the mix last year and he believed in himself, so he goes for it?
He's got the pressure on him. I think last year I think those circumstances were really great for Smith to improve because the spotlight was on those three other guys that, I mean, certainly you want to be recognized as well, but there was no pressure on anything he did was going to be an upset, or he didn't have anything to lose, or the other guys did in those kind of finishes. Now all of a sudden you flip that around. Now the spotlight's on him. He's got everything to lose. So there is that extra pressure and dynamic now where people are looking at him from the national limelight to be the next guy up in Ohio, especially after the season and really year those three had. I mean, there's some pressure just from the Ohio fans to keep performing on a national level, and with him kind of now carrying that banner comes with added pressure to perform. So it'll be interesting to see how he starts to handle that. Like we were talking about him here, like he's the guy coming into the season, so now it's time to perform to it.
And that course is very fast. Obviously, it's out there at the Raceway. And, he didn't break 16 minutes, so he's got a lot to improve on. Obviously, his times are going to get faster. It'll be interesting to see where this state goes, where the players go in the coming weeks, but it's a good indication. Yeah. Speaking of that on the girls' side, Michigan, over even last year, just strong state. And this year looks to be no different. We saw last week Erica Vanderland, who was a Foot Locker Nationals qualifier, really blow up in her first race, 1750. But now we also have a freshman that we didn't really expect coming in, throws down the #1 time and a really big time in Michigan history. So what do we see out of Michigan?
I was really impressed with Vanderland. I mean, for her, she ran one of the fast times ever at this meet, going back to, she was 10 seconds behind the fast time we've ever seen, because that was in 2016. And for her, that's a huge personal best. 148 speed rating in August is phenomenal. And so to see that kind of opener kind of keys off, especially considering how well that, running just 10 seconds behind Maggie Farrell, and her, Maggie Farrell was a phenomenal athlete. So there's some good gauges there that we can look at. We can look at the course, there's historical performances, and she's stacking up well against someone who used to be another phenomenal Michigan high schooler. So I think all those things kind of gear towards that being something that's really solid and not something we can't really, put some concrete metrics behind. So I really like what we're seeing out of her early on, and they've had some good athletes out of that school before. So I think it'll be really interesting to see now how she can progress into the season.
Yeah, I mean, the only other athlete I think in Michigan that maybe is up to her level is Adeline Ackley, and I don't believe they're in the same divisions, so I don't know how many times they're going to match up throughout the season. I think at the state level, Vanderland and Ackley run at different divisions. But if we did see them pairing off, that could be a very, very interesting battle.
An interesting comment here coming through on Facebook. Do you think that Erica is a top NXN contender?
I think.
I mean, if she goes, she was a Foot Locker girl last year. If she competes there, I mean, it might be a situation of scheduling. I think if she goes to NXN, I think I think she could compete, definitely, for sure. I mean, she's definitely fit, and this year she's more ready than she's ever been. But it's just a matter of where it fits and what her plan is going forward, because I don't know how often Michigan athletes go to NXN.
I think last year she had a stellar track breakout season. You know, as far as like on the national scene, we started talking about her a lot. She ran some really quick times, which you know, to me indicates like I think she's ready to roll this cross country season.
Yeah,
on a national level.
Last year
easily
was the first time she even competed post states.
Yeah,
in a national level meet.
Well,
so,
Michigan has that tough because they have those weird rules about not competing so far out of your state and whatever, and can't be connected to the team, etc.
Hey, she's a senior this
year.
She's gonna be a senior this
year.
She can do whatever the heck
like,
she wants.
Yeah, I mean that's what you see most of the time in Michigan is seniors getting able to do those opportunities. So,
more comments as we're talking about the top performances from the weekend and the rankings coming in from social media. This one from Alonzo. Crazy that there isn't a senior in the top 5 rankings after the first week. It's 4 juniors and a sophomore.
I mean that's traditionally what we've seen, right? The young talent has really flourished at a very early stage, and what I think what hurts seniors a lot of times coming into cross country is the fact that they have to navigate their college choices, right?
Yep.
And it limits them sometimes. I mean, it takes away. You looked at Catherine Lee at New York last year. She really didn't race at all up until nationals, and that set her back in her season. So I think when seniors have to navigate that time, it really it impacts them at the very least. I would say.
I think a lot of big things too is that a lot of coaches occasionally will save some of those senior athletes till later in the season when big meets really start to matter. In these early season meets, we'll see a lot of maybe the underclassmen start running at them just to kind of get that team camaraderie and get a couple of younger kids some meets before the older kids step in and here we go. You have to go to the Woodbridges, the Manhattans, the meets like that where the older kids are going to take over. So
yeah, and I'm really curious to see what happens in terms of how she races in the future. This is Abby Vanderkwai, 17:05 at Orchard View, which is, from what we can gather, pretty legit. Number 1 time, but she's a freshman. But she comes out of the blue a little bit, and I think when you look at a girl that young competing at that stage, you wonder whether it's just kind of a fluke. Is it the course? Is it short? Do you think she's going to come back with even faster time? I mean, what are the chances we see her again and just race at that level? Do you think?
Yeah.
It's got to be tough.
It's super hard to tell even too, just looking at the results from that particular course and that particular race, because she was 3 minutes, 5 minutes, like she was way ahead of everybody. She blew everybody out of the water. So it's either she is the real deal or.
Well, a good example last year is Lauren Trapani out of Pennsylvania. She went 17:41 at a really early meet in September, which was a number 1 time in Pennsylvania, I think, at that point. But she struggled throughout the course of a year, being young, probably racing at a higher level, learning how to race. It just didn't come back to that. So I think Abby's probably going to learn a lot in the next few weeks, or she could just completely blow up, and she might be the best thing we've ever seen at Michigan. You don't know.
We got to see her race somebody, and then we'll know.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that is always interesting each year is the changing of the guard at some of these teams as teams develop and insert sort of transfers to their lineups, and it helps benefits some teams. So let's talk about some transfers that are going to have a big impact in 2018. What's going through your heads?
We got to look at the Northwest first, I think. I mean, that's where we're going to see, I think, maybe a transfer that is going to have the biggest impact towards NXN teams and a highly competitive region. Corey, we talked about this more a little bit, but Ember Stratton is moving to Montana. Can you break down where she's headed for everybody?
Well, she's going to Hellgate High School out in Montana, moving from Sunset. She early on in her career, she ran a lot with girls out of Jesuit early on in her career, moved on to Sunset. Now Montana, she's going to be immediately one of the top girls at that program. Obviously we know a lot about Bozeman and Billings. They've been the top programs in those states, that state for a long time, but a girl like Stratton, who 2 years ago was second at NXN, immediately boosts that profile if she's healthy.
I love this move because Tiana Vladek's already there, so she has elite individual competition, but then Hellgate is one of those teams that is on the cusp of being an NXN contender prior to this. Now, all of a sudden, this is a team that's right in the mix. They were 3rd in Montana based on just returning 5Ks and team scores. Now, this clearly vaults them to number 1. They were 8th, I believe, at the regional last year. about 70 points off from qualifying for an NXN spot. Now you put one of the best athletes in the country on this roster. This is a top 2 team in the NXN Northwest all of a sudden. Top 3, who knows? Like, this is absolutely an NXN contending program that just completely shakes up the entire region and what we thought, and these Oregon teams, Montana, like everything just completely changed. And you look at Hellgate, they return everyone except for the number 2 runner from last season, that team as well. So they bring back an experienced team and add an individual who could be a top 5 individual NXN. Like, this is a game changer.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's a game changer. Took the words out of my mouth.
They're definitely going to be strong. We have Bozeman at 24 right now in our preseason rankings based on history alone. I mean, they only have, I believe, 2 returning from last year, but you got to think a team like Bozeman reloads often rather than rebuilds. Billings, Tiana Vladek, she's been in NXM before, did not qualify there last year, so there's got to be a little bit of redemption on her mind there. But I love seeing teams that don't have really the history or just are using a lot of that, just like this is the season or this is the year, that buoy them up toward the top. So I think this could really help them too.
Yeah, that's going to be really exciting to see how that plays out in the Northwest, because we've seen in the last handful of years kind of the same teams on the girls' side, especially kind of rising to the top. Now this just changes the entire outlook.
What about the national champions on the boys' side, Loudon Valley? They graduated 2 of their big guys, but they have some guys coming in, and they were just stacked in the track season with guys just were like licking their chops trying to get into that squad.
Yeah, I mean, and so now they have, it sounds like 2 to 3 transfers. Definitely a guy from Pennsylvania, and then the other one,
a 172 guy.
Yeah, 172 speed rating.
We were told.
Yep. From, yeah, I mean,
those are. I mean, that's the kind of depth you want to slot in too for the a team like that, which is returning. Nice. They're obviously lost their some of their top guys, but they're returning the rest of their depth to add in those mid 170s. Just shores up your like 4 to 7 and just make sure it tightens that compression. Your gap comes down. You're displacing other guys, and so while those aren't necessarily, it's not like another Sam Affolter, but you don't need 7. They didn't need 7 guys like that. You just need the depth to be able to displace other runners, and that's, I think, what we're seeing here a lot in Valley, and which is why everyone else is like, come on, man.
That's why they were so unbeatable last year in a lot of ways, is because, if Sam had an off day, say Peter came up or Colton came up, and they really just picked it up as seniors. Like, when you have that depth, it allows your top guys, your leaders, to give them break a little bit, right? Or, they don't necessarily have to, like, pump off the gas, but, like, in the back of Sam's mind, he knows he has one guy who's always going to sort of be there if he has a bad day. So I think that really helps programs like Loudon Valley.
It alleviates the pressure from the American Fork style teams that we've seen in the past, where when you don't have that 4 or 5, maybe they're down in the 150s or 160s. If one of your top 3 has an off day, it's it. There's nothing you can do. But Loudon Valley just has that 5th through 7th that can just file right in, and you're not going to be in too tough a position, even if one guy isn't running at his full best.
One of the big moves that we reported maybe a couple weeks ago was Zachary Kine. He was of Nequa Valley. He was one of the top programs in Illinois, always competes for a state championship, moving on to Pennsylvania on the west side of the state, North Allegheny. That is a huge move, a huge, big benefit for North Allegheny, who's traditionally pretty strong too. But not only are they going to be competitive now in Pennsylvania in 3A, but they could maybe make a push for NXR Northeast bid there. I mean, CBA is obviously pretty good, but last year they didn't really perform well at the national level, and a team like that could maybe sneak in. So what does Zachary Kine do for a Pennsylvania squad?
We're kind of wide open right now. I know Brian's been probably the deepest into the boys' rankings, but there's no Northeast team that's like, oh man, these guys are gonna. There's no Loudon Valley of the Northeast. Like, I feel like there's more in that like top 5 teams. When you see top like 5 or 6 teams in the mix, anyone has a chance to make NXN.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was gonna say too. Is I was just looking at NXN Northeast a little bit ago, and there's a couple teams from Rhode Island. You got like LaSalle, you got
Bishop Hendrickson.
You have CBA, obviously. You have Memorial Yeah. The team from
Xavier.
yeah, Xavier. There's just all these teams that could step up big, and they just have so many guys in the same region and block. Like if he goes to North Allegheny and they choose to run NXN, it could be interesting to see where they fall in that block of guys. But it's such a tight region, and it seems like it always has been the past couple of years. If you look back, every now and then CBA will have a very dominant team. But that NXN Northeast region, it's going to be interesting to see how they can shake up there.
Pennsylvania courses are very difficult. Like depending on where you go,
yeah, you
can transition to different courses very well. Oftentimes, New Jersey it's the same way. But I think for a team like North Allegheny who's going to run on that Hershey State course, which kicks your butt, I think Zach Hines going to benefit from that. I don't know much about Detweiler Park, but is it flat?
Illinois is known for having downhill courses.
Yeah, so I mean they're just super fast. Like it's going to be much different in Pennsylvania for Zach Hine, but I think he's going to benefit from it, and he's a guy who can definitely make big waves this year as a senior coming out. One more transfer out of Louisville, Myacia Bright of the NXN qualifying DuPont manual team last year on the girls' side, going to Belleville East in Illinois, so that's a big addition for them this year. But we're going to move on to underrated teams that could make some moves this year. On the boys' side, let's start with you, Brian and Travis. What do obviously we got some big time top 25 teams, and then we have these teams that are making their way up.
The team I just mentioned, LaSalle from LaSalle Academy from Rhode Island. Their last major player was obviously like DJ Prinsby and Matthew Bouthelet. He was also really good. They were 10th at NXN Northeast in 2016, but they returned several guys. A lot of their guys, like nobody has national level experience, I think, on their team anymore. They placed. They did run at NXN a couple years back at the national meet, but with the team now that they have, they're again right on that cusp of the teams that make it. Based on our team scores, if you look at the team scoring, they right now sit 6th, but it's just so tight between all those teams, the way things can play out and the spread of guys. If they have some guys that have really improved this year, I think they could be in the mix in that Northeast region for a possible team title. We could see them even in the MileSplit 50.
Yeah, some of the teams last year that were, no doubt like some of the strongest in that region, like Green Hope, like you have here. They're rebuilding, right? This year, they're not as strong as they were.
Well, that'll be in the Southeast region. And I'm looking at the Southeast region. You have Cary stepping up big and Severna Park. Thank you.
Yeah.
Severna Park from Maryland. Both those teams look very strong. I mean, obviously, I think Loudoun Valley is still probably the #1 team to beat in that NXN Southeast region.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any denying that. Then you probably have some Bullis in there, but I think if Bullis, not Bullis.
Bullis is just completely. What? They're no longer a sprint program.
What?
They're distance.
Jolie, what are you doing?
Jolie's got his sprinters out there doing some cross country. There we go. Bulls, thank you, from Florida, stepping up big. I think that they're going to have some challenges, though. I think Cary is also looking strong. I kind of looked at some of the numbers. Green Hope last year had 5 seniors in their top 7. They won Class 4A in North Carolina. Cary was just behind them. This year, Cary's going to have 5 seniors, and they were runners-up in Class 4A. So that was last year, 2 Green Hope. So this year, with those guys and that group of guys, and I think they were 6th at NXN Southeast, is what I have here. So it'll be interesting to see if they can step up and kind of fill the shoes of that staple North Carolina team we saw last year in Green Hope. And then Severna Park obviously is in the same kind of boat. They have a lot of senior guys, but they also had guys go 1-2 in the Rising Stars race, which was really big for them.
I remember talking to them last year.
I saw the interview they did with them.
They were so stoked to be like, oh man, MileSplit's talking to us.
Well, I mean, those are the kinds of guys though that you got to look at to see as like potential teams that could step up and they could impact and influence teams. Because I think Severna Park, they have a couple guys that graduated, so they return.
And that course in Cary is pretty easy to run. NC State course. I mean, there's not a ton of a difficult traction there, and the hills aren't too terrible. I think you can get good performances out of that course there for NXR South.
Coming from the Twitter poll, the fans think that LaSalle is the most underrated, with Cary as a close second.
Yeah, I mean, both teams have big potential in either region, because either region is, I mean, other than the Southeast, and I think still Loudoun Valley is pretty locked down. Yeah. But the second spot is up for grabs in my mind.
Right, and I think
Northeast, same thing.
LaSalle has a little more of an uphill battle. I think just when you look at that Northeast region, they're they're in that definitely in that top 5 group, but they're kind of towards the back half of that, where the teams you talk about in Cary and Severna Park. Bulls comes in, I think, as a solid number 2 team in that region, but these other programs are right there.
Yeah,
like that's a much tighter. I feel like that's a much tighter team battle developing than kind of LaSalle, who, especially because when we looked at the Northeast, that was without considering North Allegheny being in that picture. So that even just throws another team in that mix. I think LaSalle's certainly going to be there, but with what you've talked about in your points with Cary and Severna Park, I think those two probably have a better shot to advance to nationals.
Cary looks exactly like the Green Hope team of last year. If you break down what the guys that they have and kind of like, I think, and especially if everybody steps it up a couple notches, which normally you progress and get better. So.
They probably
Green Hope dominated last year.
They probably are hoping they're not Green Hope though, because Green Hope didn't get out of Southeast last year because they didn't run well.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
but yeah,
the third most underrated team was also from Rhode Island, from the Twitter poll, Bishop Hendricken, and then Centaurus from Colorado coming in 4th.
All right, Bobby Reyes could probably talk a little bit more about Centaurus.
To me, I look at Dowling Catholic on the boys' side. They're from Iowa. They've flown under the radar just because that region is just dominated by Minnesota year after year, and dominated by programs that are contending for national titles. Teams like Wayzata, and so they just get overlooked being out there in Iowa by these stronger Minnesota programs who just have the history and the legacy, and traditionally have had years where they're vying for podium spots at NXN. But Dowling Catholic has really had a great progression over the last couple of years, going back to 2015, where they had their breakout race at Heartland. They finished 5th overall, came back 8th, and then last year were 3rd, just so close from NXN spot. Didn't get the nod for a wild card berth, but when you look now at those 4 teams of turning, it's the same contenders as last year. It's Wayzata, Edina, Middleton, and then you have Dowling Catholic. But those other 3 programs are losing guys. They're each losing 2 to 4 scores. Wayzata is losing 4, Edina lost 3, Middleton lost 2. All of those scorers, and even though Wayzata is going to reload like always because they have 10,000 kids on that program, Dowling Catholic lost a few. They lost the number 1 and the number 6. They only lost 1 scorer, and their 8th and 9th runners who are now bumping up are right near where their 6 and 7 were last year. So they're bringing in more depth than those other programs, and this feels like it's the year for these guys. It's the 4th year of kind of this steady build. The consistency, they've proven now they can go to the regional and perform. And again, this year, that region's always in the mix for wild cards, but you don't want to leave anything up for granted. And they just always fly under the radar, even though this year they're coming in ranked higher, as you'll see soon because we go down the rankings. Dowling Catholic's coming up, so stay locked into MileSplit. But this team is entering the season higher than they've ever entered, ever for this program. So it's not as if, we didn't know they were coming, but this feels like the year things are finally coming together for them.
Yeah. One thing at Heartland, you really have to be ready to run on that course because it's like a racetrack, right? If you're not up to the task, you'll easily get past. And I mean, in terms of having depth and scoring on a course like that, you really just, some teams can get, just leave devastated because they just didn't run up the expectations. But that South Dakota course in Sioux Falls is freaking fast as anything. So,
and that's another that I've always loved that region too, especially over the last number of years, because these teams, even Wayzata, these teams aren't built like Loudoun Valley necessarily was. They don't have those all-star. Because they had Khalid Hussein the last couple of years, but Wayzata and a lot of these other programs are all built about team depth. And so it just makes the racing so much more exciting because the team scores are always so tight between the top 5 to 6 teams. You're talking about 10, 15, 20, 30 points separating, potentially the top 5 teams at these races. And so to what you're saying, it's a coin flip at a certain point. Like one team just comes in on that day and just upsets everybody. I think, Middleton kind of came in last year, not as unknowns, but there are other programs you're looking at that were probably going to coming in stronger, but Middleton, phenomenal racing out of them.
Have the day.
Yeah, and you love to see those kind of regions when there's so many strong programs that they don't have the superstars, but you come in and have a good day and you can just shock everybody.
On the girls' side, there's also some pretty interesting teams to take a note of. Hart out in Michigan, buoyed by Adeline Ackley, who's their number 1. St. Michael Albertsville in Minnesota, who has a freshman coming in by the name of Allie Weimer. She won an open race at Heartland in 1714, so she's a very good 1749. Sorry, she's a very good talent there that could help them to potentially a Minnesota State title and maybe do some things at Heartland. And then in California, the big studs that we always talk about are probably going to be back again this year. Great Oak, Buchanan, Claremont, but we can't forget about Granada on the girls' side in terms of their depth. Very, very strong this year. 4 girls under 1850 this year. Their spread is a very measly 70-some seconds, 74 seconds, and I just think they're going to be interesting. But, you know, when we talk about the girls, the underrated girls teams, sometimes we won't really see this happen or unfold up until state season when we really get an indication of, like, this is the big-time competition that some of these smaller schools like Hart are finally going to face.
Yeah. Now, which division is Granada in California?
I believe they're D1, I believe.
So they're in there with the big dogs.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, too, to have another one of those teams thrown in the mix from California. It seems like we get that every year, too, that the dynasty programs are what they are, and they're always back. And then there's always one of these other teams that seems to come up and just mix things up as we go through California.
Well, even last year on the boys' side, it was Eleanor Roosevelt boys. They had just a stacked squad last year. They had 3 or 4 seniors that were just, like, carrying the team, and they mixed things up. Got in the mix.
Yeah, and I think with the amount of depth there are just in so many California programs, how many teams there are, so many strong teams. I think when you look at these rising programs, I give them a little bit more credit, where sometimes these other regions you have rising programs, and it's like, all right, well, I feel like I don't know if you're there yet this year, but these California programs race so much, and they race so many other talented they race up through the season. Where sometimes in these more spread out regions, teams are just, whomping on, other small areas.
Yep.
And there's no one there. So you can see, you have a tight spread, you're this, that, but then they're 1 runners there, and then the next week they're 1 runners or 7 runners. You're like, what's going on?
Yeah.
But California, they're going toe to toe week after week with all these good programs that you kind of look at that and it's like, all right, if Granada can prove that they're in the mix, then that to me stands out a little more, because that this program is going to have to race through some serious competition.
Well, that's the challenge I think we face when we look at rankings to start the season. Is we know what some of these teams offer on paper,
sure,
but in reality, it's not the same. These guys could go out, these gals can go out on courses and not perform well, or just they need to find their rhythm early on. But ultimately, we won't really see what a lot of teams are made of up until they're forced to compete. Like you just said, I want to offer another team that's risen a lot preseason hype out of Wisconsin, Muskego, who's also ranked in our national rankings. Now, they got a lot of hype around them. Can they put it all together? Last year, they were 2nd in Wisconsin, haven't won a state title, but they have almost all their girls left. Now, that, to me, is a matter of just producing when it matters. A lot of these teams that we've talked about at this point haven't done that yet. They need to do it in 2018. I think that's sort of maybe what a lot of these teams and the coaches are talking about. We have the hype now, or maybe we have the exposure, but now what do we do in that moment and make it happen?
Yeah. And let us know who you think. Do we leave someone off? Underrated teams you guys are all looking out? Facebook, Twitter. Obviously, this will all go up later. Make sure comment. Let us know who you think we're sleeping on right now. That's going to come out this year and surprise everyone. There's always some teams that come out of nowhere throughout the season.
For sure.
Once we get mid-September, you start getting the GRIACs and you start seeing some of those big races. That's when you start kind of seeing those early shockers come up and show some people.
This weekend, the Hebron Friday Night Hawk Invitational in Texas. We also got a very fast meet, first to finish kickoff classic in Illinois last year. I remember that was a killer race, featured, I think, Danny Kilray.
Yeah.
So that's in Illinois. We'll have all the coverage for you over the weekend on the Scoop, and we'll continue our MileSplit 50 series, individually ranking teams and individuals up until the 30th. Until then, we'll also have our countdown show 5 to 1 on August 30th. We'll unveil the top 5 teams and individuals. All of us will meet there, and we'll go over that. obviously at that point, I think people will know like who the top 5 teams and
Yeah,
individuals are.
Have a
But
pretty good understanding and idea of it.
yeah.
Stay on the lookout. There'll be some Twitter polls and other things too. Definitely we'll get some fan engagement going to see what you guys think about who the top 5 should be, where they should be ranked as we go into that reveal show on the 30th. Mark it on your calendars right now. So don't forget.
Mark it on the calendars. Thanks for watching. This has been MileSplit Live. We will see you next Tuesday.